My name is Frank Kodak, and today, July 15th, 2013, I am pleased to have the opportunity to speak with a dear friend for nearly 40 years, Victoria K. Trotta, Associate Dean for the Ross Blakely Law Library of Arizona State University Sandra Day O'Connor College of Law. Tori and I are sitting in a suite at the Sheraton Hotel and Towers in Seattle, Washington at the site of the 2013 annual meeting of the American Association of Law Libraries. Tori, given our long friendship, which goes all the way back to our student days at the UCLA Library School, it's a particular pleasure for me to speak with you as part of the Oral History of Law Librarianship project, a component of the Spinelli Law Library Reference Shelf on Hein Online.
Well, and Frank, I really appreciate the opportunity to contribute to this program and this project because I love to tell a story, and I think I'm a typical boomer law librarian. So I think my story is a typical story from our generation. So I'm thrilled to be asked to do this, and I'm looking forward to sharing my experiences.
Well, that's great. Let's begin by learning a little bit about you on the personal side. So can you tell us a bit about your early life, where you were raised, your family, and what your childhood was like?
Well, that'll be a quick story. I was born in Spokane, Washington, an incident of the Korean War. My father was a flight surgeon at Fairchild out in Spokane, and I was born there. And then we returned to San Francisco, where my dad finished his medical training at UCSF, and my younger sister was born there. And then 4 years later, we relocated to Riverside, California, which is where my parents were both born and raised. And so I basically grew up in Riverside, California for the rest of my life. I am a total Southern California gal. I got all my education in Los Angeles. I attended Occidental College in Los Angeles, and then eventually I went to UCLA Library School, and then I went to University of Southern California Law School. And I had a career there until 1988. So
very good.
I love Southern California.
And just, okay, so let me ask this. Let's get a little bit more about the personal Tori. What do you do when you're not working? What are some of your hobbies, passions, pursuits outside of law librarianship?
Well, I love to read, and I love to travel, and being in AALL has really allowed me to see a lot of the world. It's given me itchy feet. I just got back from Tanzania on a safari, and that was really a blast.
Wow.
That was completely outside my comfort zone. I belong to 2 book groups. In an earlier manifestation, I did cycling. I did road cycling on long trips. Obviously, I don't do that anymore. And then I just work. I love living in the Southwest. We like to be outside and just be in nature. So.
Very good. Well, now that we know something about your personal life, you've already begun to introduce us into your educational and professional training, but tell us a little bit about your early career aspirations. How and when did you become interested in librarianship?
Well, it was completely inadvertent. When I was at Occidental College, I was in their little social service society, and one of our tasks was to support the dedication of the new library. And so I was on site helping, and the keynote speakers were Lawrence Clark Powell and Ward Ritchie, 2 Occidental College graduates. And Lawrence Clark Powell, of course, the university librarian at UCLA, and founding the library school there, and Ward Ritchie being a private book publisher and bookman. And the 2 of them talked about the wonders of books and people and libraries and the joy of that line of work, and I was just mesmerized. I didn't know anything about a library. I'd never worked in one. I didn't even know you could ask a librarian for help. I couldn't be more clueless. And the other thing about Lawrence Clark Powell was he had this long streaming gray hair, and he had arrived to the festivities in a silver Porsche. And I thought, this guy's onto something. So I went home, I said, I think I'm gonna be a librarian, and my family and friends were just horrified. Oh, you can't do that, you're too loud, you're too funny. You know, they hit all the stereotypes of people that don't know what they're talking about. Right, and I thought, okay, well, that's probably true. So I didn't think any more about it, and I graduated, and I had no career plans. And so I went to work for Hamburger Hamlet, and they worked me to death And about 6 months in, I said, I'm going to look at that library thing again.
It became more attractive.
It did, like them. And in the meantime, I had read all of Lawrence Clark Pell's books about Los Angeles and UCLA and Oxy and Robinson Jeffers, and I was just mesmerized. It was an emotional and sentimental decision for me. So I went to UCLA, and it was a 2-year program, and I fell in love with the work. I loved being on campus. I loved everything about it. I needed to work, so I got a job at the Government Documents Depository, and they had international to local. I was trained to be a student reference librarian, and I worked nights and weekends. And I learned all about documents. That's when I fell in love with government information and government documents. It was just a great experience. So, but in the summer, I needed more money because the UCLA job paid $2 an hour, and I needed to work. So I got a job. I saw there was a job opening at the USC Law Library to be a catalog clerk for the summer. And I really wanted to be, my life's aspiration was to be an acquisitions librarian. So I didn't want to do cataloging, but I thought, what the hell? Because it paid $5 an hour, and it was only 12 miles away from my house instead of 24. And I was driving an old clunker car, my folks. So I went, and Kathleen Pekarovich interviewed me, and she said, well, we really filled the catalog spot, but just wait here a minute. So she went, she got Alan Hollick, who was the assistant director. He interviewed me, and then they said, come with us, and I walked in, and Albert Brecht was the interim director there, and he checked me out, and they offered me a job doing acquisitions stuff that summer in between library school.
Is this your summer after?
First year, is in between my first and second
year.
And again, I fell in love with the place. I fell in love with the people, I fell in love with the building. Even though it was USC, which I thought I would never, touch with a 10-foot pole, but I just fell in love with the place. So I went back to library school and I took all the classes to get a certification in law librarianship, and I did that. Then I worked for a while, and then Steve Barkin, who was working as a reference librarian there at the time, really encouraged me to go to law school. And I think also you did at the time. I was like, oh, that seems like a lot of work. No, really, you got to do it. So of course I did what I was told. And I thought I was giving notice when I went in to tell Albert I was going to go to law school, but they arranged for me to go part-time. So I was allowed to work and go part-time, and I graduated, and then I took the California bar. And that's pretty much it. I mean, I just stumbled into it. I love it, though.
That's great. So you touched upon the fact that you went to the University of Southern California, UCLA's arch rival.
Yeah.
But I can sympathize with that. I
Yeah.
have 3 degrees from UCLA and also ended up at USC.
Right.
But USC was a great learning ground. It had some fabulous people there. You've already mentioned some of the names. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your experiences there and some of your responsibilities, both before and after earning your degree, and also tell us a little bit more about the people that you worked with at USC.
It was really a very special place. I started out as acquisitions librarian, which was really my total career aspiration. And I was there for 2 years. And then Kathleen Pekarovich, who was the head of tech services, took a hiatus from her career altogether. She ultimately ended up back at UCLA. But then I became head of tech services, and I said to Albert, I can't do that. I don't know anything about cataloging. He's like, you'll figure it out. Just do it. So, okay. So I did that for about 8 years. And then I started to turn 30. And I thought, well, what am I going to do? I got to make a decision. And that's when I was encouraged to I decided I loved it enough to make the commitment. And I knew that if I was ever going to be a director, I needed to get a law degree. And so I really sort of wanted to know what all the fuss was about. So I found that out. I was not very good at it, but I was working full time, so it was okay. And so then, and there were a lot of colleagues that went through there that became directors. There was you, Frank Kodak, Alan Hollick, Stephen Barkin, Paul George, Pauline Aranis, John Haskell, Darren Fox, who I didn't get to work with. He came right after I did. It was just a hotbed of law librarians. And it was because of Albert, which I know I'll get to talk about in a minute. But there were many talented people. Leonette Williams, we hired her, and she is a star in her field, and just lots and lots of wonderful people there. And the other thing about USC was that when I got there, Dean Nelson had just become the dean, and she wanted to take it from being a solid regional institution to a national. And so we got to help with that.
One of the things that that I think was a hallmark of USC at that time, and as far as I know continues to be, was the close relationship between the faculty and the librarians and library staff. There's always seemed to me a deep respect, and we mentioned Albert Brecht a couple times, and I think he had a lot to do with that.
I totally agree with you. He was a very special human being, and one of his many gifts was that he could spot talent, and he was always a strategic thinker. Sometimes he said things that were a little off the beam, but he was a strategic thinker. And so the collection at USC was standard. It had holes. There weren't resources, but he was astute enough to know that a sophisticated service and research and reference service for faculty would be just what we needed to do. And that is a lesson I've taken with me my entire career, because I think that's one of the secrets of his success and positioning that library staff to really be an integral part of that faculty. And they did also have support from the deans. And in many places you can have all the service you want, but you're still not in the same league.
I think what he was doing in that philosophy really complemented and supported the point that you made earlier about Dean Nelson wanting to change the approach of the law school and change it into a national school, which they certainly have achieved. And so it was a good match. They were ready for that kind of service. They needed that kind of service if they were going to make the jump that they wanted to make.
And we had, Judy Resnick went through there, Erwin Chemerinsky. I mean, I was trying to think of some of the names. I ran into Judy Resnick, who came to ASU to give a speech in another college, and she came over to the law school and she asked to see me. And I haven't talked to her in decades. And she told my dean, no wonder your library's so good. They were great at SC. They were the best. So it's a point of pride for all of us, I think. Absolutely. But it's lessons that we've taken in our own careers. It's been great.
You started off by pointing out that you love to tell stories. I wonder if you have any stories about USC that you can share with us.
Well, again, Albert is sort of a linchpin. Albert encouraged us to be active, and we had a wonderful regional chapter, which we were all heavily involved in. And so a lot of my stories have to do with the people that I came in contact with through my professional time there. But Albert would be he was like the welcome wagon. When any time a dignitary from anywhere, whether it was to a SCAL meeting or just breezing through, he would take them around. He'd have some of his lieutenants come with them. Once Leah Chanin came, and Alan and I were slammed in the back seat of his Buick. Leah came with this gigantic fur coat, and they sat in the front seat. She wanted to see Beverly Hills. We cruised up and down Beverly Hills Rodeo Drive, and they were yakking, and Alan and I were just to be seen and not heard. And we ended up, Albert took us to lunch at the Bullock's Wilshire Tea Room. And so we had tea.
Now the site of Southwestern University.
Tea and fashion show. And I can tell you, Albert knew his way around a fashion show. They would come around and he would, have a conversation with the models. It was a riot. Alan and I had to kick ourselves under the table to just not to burst out laughing, because it was such a natural. I mean, the guy just knew his way around everything. And of course, Leah loved him, and they told stories, and it was just wonderful. So he was always, and the other thing that he did, which I tried to take into my career, was he made a point of bringing the ALL dignitary or someone from town or wherever in contact with his staff and with other leaders in SCAL, so that they would get to know the new people, the young people, and maybe make a place for them.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that you make. He was a mentor without being obvious about it,
right,
but he always thought and brought other people into it, into whatever the activities were. That's absolutely true. Yeah, so I think I want to at least get on record here as pointing out that Albert is not only a legend at USC and in AALL, but this year he's being inducted into AALL's Hall of Fame.
Yay!
And that's an achievement and a recognition long overdue, and he certainly deserved it.
I think there was a little rivalry between him and Roy Mursky. You know, he was a different kind of mentor than Roy. And so there was a little bit of, I think, a little competitiveness that Albert handled with a lot of class.
Well, I think that if you had to come up with one word to describe Albert, I think class would certainly be an apt one. We may come back to SC, but let's move you along a little bit. In 1988, you moved to Phoenix, first to become a reference librarian at Maricopa County Law Library, and then within a matter of months, the law librarian at Lewis and Roca law firm, a position that you held, I think, for 8 years. What was it like, one, to make that transition from Southern California to Arizona, and two, to move to, you've been in the academic world, now all of a sudden you're in the private sector. What was that about?
It was really interesting that way I got there. And Albert was very disappointed. He told me my career was over. He's like, this is the stupidest thing you've ever done. It was like I was being busted back to private. I had fallen in love with an Arizona state and local tax lawyer, and I was a little burned out. And I think I just wanted to get a life. And so I moved to Phoenix rather precipitously to take this job. Elizabeth Schneider was in charge of county, and she had a job. And so I was the reference librarian, and which I loved. It was really fun. I was just getting the rhythm of it when I got a call from Lewis and Roca. And the way I got that call, again, connections, John Frank, who was the senior partner there and was his library. It's over 60,000 volumes, so it was a very large private library in the region, called Marion Gallagher. And he said, we need another law librarian. Who do you recommend? And Marion called Denny Haythorne in Whittier. And I guess she thought he was interested in making a change. And he said, I'm not going to Phoenix, but Tori Trotta just moved there, and she's really good, so they need to call her. And so it was like the triangular again. So I loved being at the law firm. I'm not sure that I could have done it as a new librarian. I'm too timid for that. But since I'd had so much experience...
I just have to interject here that timid and Tory are not
but I
words
mean
that
in terms
most
of my
would-
skill set. If I had gone into a law firm at the beginning of my career, I really admire firm librarians who take that path, because I didn't think I could have done it. But I loved it, and my temperament is really most suited to privates. I think probably was my highest and best use. But it was a wonderful collection. I instituted a service program. I would think, what would Albert do? Sometimes I'd call him up, which he loved. And I loved the time there. Serious bigwigs in that law firm. I met a lot of people. It was a small legal community. I got to teach. I put on a CLE on internet in legal research with a colleague for a year, and that was really fun. So it was a lovely experience, and I loved it. I loved being there, and I recommend it highly.
And you were heavily involved as a private law librarian in professional service activities for PLL and the like.
Yeah, the needle was in the vein already by the time I got to Arizona, and of course, as you well know, people that switch between sectors have a little bit of cachet. So I was in high demand for a variety of kinds of things, and one of them was they asked me to run for the board, which I was thrilled to do. Well, first I guess I'd been PLL chair, and then I ran for the board. And so it was very hard for law firm librarians to get the resources to make those contributions, but I just did it anyway. And so it worked out fine. And so I continued on. It was just one, because at that point then they needed a firm librarian. So I was busy. I was kept very busy. But my firm service, it was almost my favorite.
Great. Despite that, in 1996 you did come back to the academic world as associate director and head of public services at Arizona State, and a year and a half later you became the interim director, and then in July 1999 the director. Tell us a little bit about
It's
how did that happen?
usual inadvertent, being in the right place at the right time. I loved being at the firm, but electronics and technology was coming in, and I really knew that that was our future. But I wasn't really getting any traction. As much as they liked me, they didn't really get me involved in the tech, and I knew I had to get that next skill set. So as it turned out, Rick Brown, who was the director, had some staff changes, and he created a new associate director position, which I was fortunate enough to get. They liked that I'd been at the firm for all those years with all those contacts. So that's how I got there. I wanted to be involved in the technology more, and I knew that would be a place where I could get those skill sets developed, because that was sort of the last piece. And then, literally a year later, the dean announced that he was leaving to open the UNLV Law School, and he took the entire senior staff with him, including Rick Brown. So I became the interim director, and we got a new dean, and then I was made permanent director. And that's how I got there. And it was lucky, because I really do like living where I live, so it turned out fine.
Great, great. Well, let's talk a little bit about, so you transitioned academic, county, private, now back to academic, and really let's talk about how that's turned out for you. It's 14 years or so, or 15 years since you've done that. What has it been like leading a major law library into the 21st century? You talked about, you knew automation was coming. It's definitely come.
Well, the Ross Blakely Law Library is a separate building. We moved into a brand new building, and it was separate. And they moved in '93, and I got there in '96.
Right.
Yeah. In 1995, the internet hit. And so obsolescence was everywhere with that building. That became basically an albatross. And so my work, and again, the collection was nothing special, and I had a very entrenched staff with a lot of problems. And so it took several years to work that out, the staff problems. But we moved forward. We taught 1Ls. We did a lot. We beefed up the research and reference program, besides the one senior librarian who took all of that work to herself. But now, and I find that I'm informed by my private law library experience, because I've learned that no one's touching most of the material we have. And so as we have had to repurpose space, or we've had budget cuts, it's been easier for me to let go of what I consider to be some of the silo attitudes of colleagues, because they do have bigger resources to protect. Ours was not that great. So it's been an easier thing for me, but it's been something new every year. This last couple years we've been planning, I threw out 60,000 volumes this summer, probably another 50,000 next summer. I thought I was going to get through my career without actually planning and moving a new building, but I guess that's not going to happen, so I'm doing that. That's what I'm doing now. It's the change even in the last 5 or 6 years, I think the change has accelerated to a point that some of these new techniques have gelled. 5 years ago, I would have not wanted to get rid of my bound periodicals. But now I'm like, oh yeah, forget it. Out the chute. We built chutes. We literally took them out.
I want to go back to something that you kind of mentioned very quickly in passing, but it raises an interesting point, which is that both you and I in our careers have worked at different types of libraries, and some people might see that as a disadvantage. But you made a comment or two which suggested that, in fact, it was not only a positive thing for you professionally, which is frequently the reason that we think we're doing things, but that it also gave you some skills and ways of looking at things that you might not have otherwise had if you just stayed on a single track. I wonder if you think that's true, and if you have any other thoughts along those lines.
I think it is incredibly true. And I think that it's more, when we did it, it was pretty novel. I remember when you walked in and you were going to the law firm, it caused a huge sensation. And so you were helping people think in different ways. And I was fortunate that I went to work for companies that the firm appreciated I'd been an academic, and ASU appreciated that I'd been a firm. I was just lucky, because there are a lot of institutions where they're like, no, this is a skill set and this is what we want. So I think as time goes on, my observation is that most of our jobs are merging anyway. So it behooves all of us to become more eclectic in our skill set. And law firm people know this, and I think the academics are starting to buy into that much more than they used to, even 5 or 6 years ago.
Well, and you also mentioned, and I found this to be true in my own case, that at certain times and with certain institutions, they're maybe more ready to do something than the type of place that you're at. So you talked about the law firms ready to do something that the academics aren't, and then at different times it might be the reverse.
And that's one of the things I really love about law librarianship, because we have so many commonalities in our knowledge base, just in the application, and we can learn from each other. And so I always love the opportunity to get to know law librarians from all types of libraries, because they all have a little bit different take on the same set of tasks. And so it just gets better and better.
Yeah. Well, and move us now to start talking a little bit about your professional service contributions. You touched upon it a little bit before. We'll talk in more detail, but it's always seemed to me that one of the great things that ALL has going for it is the fact that it's not an organization that's limited to only one, quote, type of law librarian. And I have to say, it kind of irks me when I hear one group or another, and it's not limited to a particular group,
No.
but a variety of them will say, well, you know what, we don't really need those folks, or we would be better off if we just focused on our type of library, whereas in fact, there's so many things that we learn from each other, and as you say, many commonalities. So.
But there's enough of us that can see that there's always going to be people. That's just a fear thing, and you know, there's a lot of reasons for it, but I think it's better. And the thing is, the association, we've evolved. When we first came in, it was a much smaller group, but they got together. We did the plenary sessions of the education, and people mingled, and you got to meet all kinds of different people. And then as we grew, that big bulge of the legal profession, you know, and all those, we got our contribution, I think, is the SIS infrastructure. And so that enlarged opportunities, specialized and not, for more members. And so I think it was just the natural evolution of the profession. But I think our jobs are starting to merge. So I have hope that the next generation will get off of that. Oh, we have to have specialized training, and no one, you know, we're not interested in what you guys are doing because it doesn't apply to us, because of course it does.
Absolutely. Tori, you've contributed a great deal to law librarianship in a career that is still absolutely going strong. So among other things, you served, as you mentioned, first as an ALL board member in the mid-1990s, and then as ALL president in 2004-2005. You also chaired 2 special interest sections, the private law library SIS and the academic SIS, and that just proves the points that you've been making, as well as a number of important committees and task force. And more recently, you completed a 3-year term on the Federal Depository Library Council. You know, the truth is that it'd take me half this interview just to list everything you've done. I've just hit a few of the highlights, but I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about these experiences and what professional service generally has meant to you in your career.
Well, you know, it's meant the difference in my life. I mean, again, and it's an emotional. My filter is as sort of a starstruck little groupie. I mean, I just wanted to know everybody and know everything. My first assignment was as an acquisitions librarian. My first committee assignment, I thought I was so special, but it turns out, you know, no one wants to do this, was Exchange of Duplicates Committee. And then once they find out you'll do work, then they never leave you alone. Then you get to do everything. But my philosophy of service is that I never accept an assignment that won't teach me something that I can apply at my own work. And that has held true no matter what the task is, no matter what the committee, no matter what the assignment. And, I do have a long history because I'm willing to do it, I make the time to do it, but, I rocketed to the top of the heap. It only took 25 years. But so in that time, you can get a lot done. So I have used my professional contributions to learn and to serve. But I also took a leaf out of Alan Hollick's book, which was he never took an assignment that he didn't improve the process or the product or the service. And I try to do that. I just don't like to be on a committee and just be on a committee. I have to be pushing that envelope. What else can we do? Who else can we get going? How can we involve this kind of person or that kind? How can we improve things? So I was asked to be chair of 2 SISs that were more or less moribund at the time. So they knew that I would monkey around with it, and they're going strong. Because I also learned that where volunteers are concerned, it only takes 1 or 2 years of neglect and the whole thing falls apart again. It unwinds.
These are all just fabulous points. And they seem to me are reasons why a person who is asked or considering doing some volunteer professional service and is having some reservations about it, I think you've offered some reasons why that would push them to say, you know what, I think it's going to be worth it, not just for the organization, but for me personally. And
it's leadership's job to try and tease people that they want to be involved, but they don't know how to get in. And so there's a lot to it that I think serves everybody, whether you get resources to do it or not. You just have to do it. It's good for you. It gets you meeting people. It's all connectedness. It's all relationship. And it brings a lot of points of view onto a problem to solve.
One of the things that I have felt in my own career about my professional service is that it really helped me change my outlook on what I was doing. It moved from it being a job to it being a career. Really feeling part of a profession by going beyond what I needed to do for my own work on a day-to-day basis and trying to see a bigger picture and make some of the improvements and changes that you've mentioned. So that's a message that I try to deliver to folks who are just joining the profession. And quite honestly, and I have to bring this up, probably my best friends, my wife, all met through the profession.
Exactly.
Just on a personal level, it's very special.
I totally agree. I look forward to we see people, our friends, throughout the year. We talk, but it's just a very special group of people. Even though it's a lot bigger, and we're doing good work. We're doing very important good work.
Well, that's a good point. That brings me back a little bit to kind of ask you to reflect not just on kind of what this professional service has meant for you, but help us remind us a little bit about some of the issues and things that you've dealt with as, say, a member of the AAL Executive Board or as AAL President, some of the key issues that...
as a board member, the big issue that came up was the West merger or whatever they called it. That was very stressful because we were getting a lot of pressure from membership and the vendors, and we had to think very hard about that, what we wanted to say as a board, how we wanted to approach it, and it was a really good learning point for me because I'm not comfortable with conflict. Or I just don't really want. So it was a very uncomfortable thing. That was probably the biggest thing. We had the national conference that
National Information.
That was really very fun to bring those people in, and so I was really informed by my betters on the board and other leaders who are very much outward looking. Bob Oakley developing the information policy, infrastructure, the national conference that Carol put on, Carol Billings. You know, a lot of really out-looking things. I'm sort of a wonk, so I was trying to improve the association with internal processes. So I tried to open up the education so that more groups could have more control over their educational offerings without interference, what they viewed as interference. We streamlined the meeting because we needed to make some economies. I did some things like that aren't really very splashy, but that I think helped the association move forward, because the annual meeting was too long, it was getting too complicated, and it was costing too much money. I would have liked to, I was pushing for more webinars and to try and give committees and leadership ways to meet outside of the meeting to alleviate that pressure, but the technology just wasn't there for that yet, but I think that's coming up.
Yeah, and yet, in fact, and that's exactly right, that you were ahead of the game and you saw what was needed, and now that it is happening, so. Well, and I would just have to say that, wonk or not, I think that you can't work effectively on the so-called splashier or outward issues if internally you can't function efficiently. So these things really go hand in hand.
They do.
So,
and all of us that were in leadership, the president would, and the past president would bring in the vice president, and then there would be some continuity. So I followed Janice Johnston, and we had some joint projects that we knew we couldn't finish. I had some projects which I wanted to finish. That had to bleed into the next year. So, but you do know you only have a certain amount of time to get what you need to do. I think that I had a hand in the vendor representative. I asked my colleagues, past presidents, Frank Kodak and Margie Axman, and there was one other, Janice Johnson, to look at having a vendor representative that could start to work behind the scenes to bring, because there was a lot of tension between the members and not the vendors, but most from the members about why can't you do something about this, that, and the other thing. So we did a wonderful report, you guys. We made the recommendation, but it took a couple years for him to get used to the idea, and now we have one.
Absolutely.
So it was very satisfying service. One of my favorite things that I did was I was one of the co-founders of the Triple education. This was an example of being in demand when you switch sectors. The Grayland Institute was by invitation only group of academics that ostensibly was getting together to talk about teaching techniques. So they hauled Marie Wallace, myself, and Barbara Geyer, who was at Coca-Cola, to the Grayland to explain why law firm librarians shouldn't be responsible for training the new associates. And at the break, we were like, these guys don't need the training, the law firm librarians need the training. So I was on the Westlaw Advisory Board at the time. Marie had contacts at Lexis, so we checked with our respective people, and the Lexis people came through first. John Johnson, Marion Parker, Cindy Spohr, the three of us, and we put together Triple. And it was a fabulous experience for a law firm, and then it grew to other sectors. But I got kicked off the Westlaw Advisory Board for that because they were all in a snit. I guess they thought that I was divulging West secrets or something, like we ever got any. So my poor regional guy had to tell me I had to pick. And I said, this is an educational event. That's all this is. And so I'm committed to that. So I got kicked off the board. And then later they said, okay, come back. So I got back on. So.
Well, I think I would feel remiss if I didn't mention this. This is not you talking, but me talking at you. But you talked about the defining issue when you were on the board as being the West Thompson merger. Mm-hmm. And you talked about the pressure that put on the board and the difficult decisions it had to make to decide how to handle that. And I was I was the just elected president-elect So I attended the conference not as an actual board member, but as someone observing, ready to join the board at the conclusion of the meeting. And that is, you will recall, the board meetings technically are open to any participants, but of course, no one ever comes, except at that meeting where the membership was very, very much concerned about this issue. And so we had an open board meeting, and we had to have chairs all around the room, an extra large room, and so forth and so on. And this was the point at which the board was going to vote on what action to take. And as I recall, essentially they went around the room and each person kind of explained where they were at. And I remember this just made such an impression on me that it was very clear. You've already said, well, conflict's not something I enjoy, and it was clear you were very conflicted and you were not comfortable. But the important thing was that you said, I'm an elected board member. I am here to do the best I can to understand the issues and make the best decision I can. It's not something I feel necessarily comfortable about. That's my responsibility. And I thought, you know what, that's
where we are.
That explains exactly what a board member should do. It was it's the single most example that I can recall of that I've experienced of that being presented in that way.
Well, thank you. I had to write out my statement.
Well, you did a fabulous job.
Thank you very much.
And I took that as a role model from that point forward as to how I was going to approach my term on the board. So let's, I think we're kind of nearing the end here, but I'd love to give you a chance if there are any more memorable experiences or stories about individuals or activities that you'd like to...
When I think about my stories really revolve around the annual meeting. And my first annual meeting was Rochester in 1978. And Alan Hollick and I traveled together, and we had the old biographical directory. And we spent from Los Angeles to Chicago to Rochester poring over the biographical directory and talking about who these people were and where they worked. And Alan could mimic some of them, and he had some good scoop. And we talked the entire way, laughing. And we get to Rochester, and I go, God, the plane stops. I go, God, my throat hurts. I think I'm coming down with something. And Alan goes, yeah, me too. And the man in front of us, who had been sitting there the entire flight, he turned around and he said, the reason you people have sore throats is because you have been talking since Los Angeles. And we were horrified, because he should have just shut us up, but that's how we were. The big flap with that meeting, we were in 2 hotels. It was the first time, and you would have thought it was the end of the world. So Albert was going to show us around. He wanted to know who we wanted to meet. As a good technical services person, I wanted to meet the Moody sisters. But he was disappointed, because he said, oh, Tori, they haven't come for years.
The Moody sisters from Harvard?
Yeah, Myrtle and Margaret. And I was dying to get a load of them. But I got a load of plenty of other people. Well, I met Marion Gallagher on a bar stool. She was in the bar right there, and Albert, as one of her colleagues, ran up, and they greeted each other. And so I was eyeball to eyeball with Marion Gallagher, and he introduced me, and he said, and she said, and what do you do? And I said, oh, I'm the Acquisitions Librarian. And she said something like, well, I hope you're doing a good job. Albert is very important, or something like that. So we had a great time in Connell. That was our first Connell, and that was a very long day, but there a lot of ALL presidents came out of Connell. Margie Mays, Carolyn Ahern, my Connell, Tori Trotta, Ann Fessenden, Jim Heller, Mark Estes. I mean, it's just amazing.
Yeah.
And we bonded. I made such good friends at that was really the end. Reynold Kosek, I forgot to mention. This is a classic story that he was always out and about. There was plenty of time at these conferences to wander about. And he came back and told the story that he had been out one night after an event, and he went to the bar, and he met up with these guys. And of course it was his first conference too, so he was chatting, and they were talking, and finally, after about 3 hours of drinking in the bar, Reynolds said, so where do you guys library? And these guys looked at each other and they said, what do you mean library? We're truck salesman. We're here for a conference. That was a classic COSEC, you know, and that's just, you would just run into people like that. And in those days it was plenary, so and the thing about these men and women that were stars, who had built, really that generation built those collections. That was their thing. They were towering intellects and really laid in these collections, was that they wanted to talk to us. You could go up to any one of them, no matter how famous, and introduce yourself and have a chat. Or they would come up to you. If you were a girl, you could sit down, and Al Coco and Mort Schwartz and Dan Hankey would sit down and show you their naked lady pen. So they were just wanting to be friendly. So I remember that, and again, that's something that I hope doesn't get lost, because I think this new generation is talking through their computers. So it meant a lot to me to meet all of these towering people. Earl Borgeson, who became a mentor, even after he left, he would check in. I mean, it was just...
He left Southern California to go to Texas.
That's right, and he kept up with us. He asked about us. He wanted to know what was going on and how we were doing, and I have such a fondness for all of those towering people. Leah Chanin, Betty Taylor. Listening to Betty Taylor talk about the challenges she had as a professional woman in the Deep South, she is one of my heroes because of what she accomplished and who she was and what she did and how she built libraries and built relationships. So, you know, I just love them all. And I really owe it all to Lawrence Clark Powell, because he set the tone in 1969, and I've just really never gotten over it.
I'm glad that you reminded me about you bringing up Lawrence Clark Powell in the beginning, because I had the good fortune to hear him a few times at UCLA in the library school, etc. And I can totally understand how that would move you in this direction, because he was a great speaker and an interesting person, and just had a vibrancy that just sort of emanated from him. And he was just a little guy. It wasn't his physical presence per se, but he was
He's
pretty
sort of
special.
spindly.
Yeah.
But he drove a silver Porsche and had flowing gray hair, and he built the library at UCLA. I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
And we got to study with his lieutenants that also built it.
Absolutely. So we've covered a tremendous amount of ground, but I certainly don't want to cut it short if you've got something else to add.
I think I've covered most of my main points. You know.
Well, let me close, Tori, by telling you that on behalf of Pat Keogh, Michelle Wu, my colleagues with the Oral History of Law Librarianship Project, I want to thank you for taking time from your busy schedule to speak with us today about your experiences in the profession of law librarianship. They've been fascinating. Your remarks will be a valuable addition to the project and of interest both to our current colleagues and, I know, to those who will join the profession in the future. So thank you so much.
Well, you're very welcome. It was a pleasure.